four, three, two, one. Welcome, everybody, back to what we are watching, episode 13, lucky number 13, a baker's dozen.
Yeah,
I, I am Joey, your host, with my co host, Big TJ. How are you, sir?
man, anytime that I get to sit in a room with a tank top on across from you and we get to chop up these wise guys, man, I mean, like, where else would you rather be? For these folks that have never watched The Sopranos, I honestly believe that this is the best way to go through the series. And for anyone who's watched it or calls themselves an aficionado, I really do believe that our dialogue going back and forth is something that even they can get something from. This is where they want to be, my guy.
Absolutely. And it was a couple of weeks ago, I messaged you, and I'm sure that you were like confused at first because my sister and I have this thing set up on our phones. It's called death notifications. When we
Okay.
hear somebody dying, we need to be the first one to tell the other one that the person has died. It's really weird. And she sent me one that says RIP Tony Sirico. And so I looked it up, and if you all don't know, that's Paulie
Probably
from
won't.
the Sopranos. So I sent that to you, and you're like, in real life, or are you watching like some sort of a strange thing and he was on something else? I'm like, no, in real life. But he was 79, and there's just been some just great, fantastic, just remembrances and condolences and eulogies by his fellow castmates. All of them loved him very much. A big, like, I think the biggest person who has passed away since we started this, like the actor that played Beansy died. But if you're talking about Sopranos as a whole, Beansy's a much lower
Well,
character than Paulie.
yeah.
Um, but and of course there were characters that passed away before we started doing this show, but this is the biggest one, and the next few episodes actually we're going to be covering here, big Paulie presence.
Holy presence, man.
And
Um, it,
there's one scene that I just like, I felt what he felt in that scene. I'm like, I have been there, and we're going to talk about that because I do believe we get to that today.
it has something
What are,
karma
it doesn't. It did not have to do with Carmine. Oh wait, no, it did. It did. I'm
yeah.
sorry. It does have to do with Carmine.
Because if you're thinking about that scene, then I'm thinking I know that scene, man. It's like gut wrenching for Paulie. But we'll get into that, man. Just if I can do a quick, remembrance, this guy, Paulie, Tony Sirico did a phenomenal job of bringing that character to life. And I would be remiss if I did not pay homage to the man who did a good job. Look, he did such a phenomenal job in Sopranos that when I would go back and watch other things that he was in, I'm like, oh, that's Paulie.
Hmm.
Like, so when I go back and watch Goodfellas, having seen Goodfellas well before I saw Sopranos, but going back and watch it again, boom, that's Paulie. These are the type of things that I've said. But just the infamous wings, on the side. I said if I could have gray, which I have an abundance of it. If I could control where it went, I would have it on the sides just like that, man. R.I.P. Tony Sirico brought Paulie Walnuts Gaultieri to life, and I it's crazy because it happened shortly after we recorded our last episode.
Hmm.
So I definitely wanted to make sure that we gave the man his flowers because he did a phenomenal job, and we said that before he passed. So I can only hope that he had the opportunity to watch something that we did prior to his death. But we'll see. He probably got a lot of me doing Olivia and just turned it off. But either way, either way, man.
Or maybe that was his favorite part, like in his like
Right?
in his
What are
final
you talking?
days. He's like that's bringing me a lot of comfort.
I was like, huh?
Surrounded by family and friends. He's like, let's run that back one more time. No.
No.
Yes.
Uh-huh. A psychiatrist? You don't know what you're talking. Good times.
Oh my goodness. But we start out actually in a pretty polycentric episode.
Quite.
Started Mergers and Acquisitions, the 8th episode of season 4, the 47th overall episode. Teleplay written by Lawrence Connor from a story by David Chase, Robin Green, Mitchell Burgess, and Terrence Winter. Directed by Dan Attias and originally aired on November the 3rd, 2002. I wanted to go back here just before we get started. Robin Green is not the woman that played Angie. It's another actress who we'll get into, but everything else I said was true. She did write and do different things, but it's not Robin Green. It's somebody else. But Paulie Walnuts is concerned about his mother's welfare when she finally makes the move to the Green Grove retirement home. Quickly, Nucci is excited to reunite with old friends Cookie, Cirillo, and Min Matrone. While Nucci is in the restroom, the elderly women inform Paulie that Nucci will not be allowed to play cards with or eat lunch with them since they are in a set group. Paulie insists that they make room and be respectful to his mother. On casino night, Nucci is ostracized by Cookie after Nucci ruins a game of blackjack. Nucci then confines herself to her room, which begins to worry Paulie. An angry Paulie pays a visit to the Green Grove director, demanding that their actions to integrate his mother into the social life of the residents. But the director tries to explain that Nucci's reclusiveness is a period of transition, and that she should also make her own contributions to change her embarrassing behavior to other residents, such as crying constantly and not putting her dentures in. In spite of this, Paulie also visits Cookie's son, Chucky, a high school principal. Now, this guy, he's just trying to get through his day. You got all these students, some days it's all he can do to get through the day, and his days are just going to get worse and worse.
Worse and worse, man.
After giving him a rolling suitcase as a gift, Paulie discusses Nucci and Cookie's relationship with him and asks Chucky to talk to his mother about getting along with Nucci. Chucky tries to convince Paulie that he cannot intervene in his mother's social life. When relations between the women do not improve, Chucky is later seen chased through his high school's hallway by members of Paulie's crew, Little Paulie and Benny, and has his right arm broken. Chucky's wife then threatens to take the stubborn Cookie out of the nursing home if Cookie does not make peace with Nucci. Now, what do you think those kids thought?
Talking about the high school student?
Yeah, just see him running through.
Just to see your principal running like that, not necessarily knowing that the guys chasing them are quote unquote wise guys. Like anything. I mean, you know how I do. I like to create fiction, man. So I would have came up with some type of story as to why the principal was being chased down the hall, and 9 times out of 10, it would have something to. It would have a similar storyline to what happened to a coach in a previous season of The Sopranos. Like why else would they be chasing him through the halls? It doesn't make sense. But just that whole thing that you broke down with regards to Paulie trying to get involved when he goes to the director and she's like, "Nah, your mom's got to stop some of her behavior. She's got to stop with the crying. You know, she leaves her teeth out, which makes the other people feel more like an old folks' home than the community is ultimately what they're going for." But the biggest thing that she said to me, she's a bit of a snitch. And considering what we know about Paulie with regards to his relationship with Tony and that family because of what he is or is not letting slip to Johnny Sack, I thought that was kind of telling and kind of funny. That they made sure to put that in there. She's a bit of a tattletale, and I'm just like, oh, that's awesome. That is awesome.
Meanwhile, seeing Pie O' My at the stables, Tony meets Ralph Cifaretto's new girlfriend, the Cuban Italian Valentina Lopez, who seems to have a penchant for making practical jokes. Valentina convinces Tony to have a painted portrait made of him with the the horse, and soon Tony and Valentina retreat to a hotel room and have sex. Valentina continues to date Ralph, and Tony buys her an expensive diamond horseshoe pin as a parting gift. Valentina objects. She still wants to see Tony and complains to him that her sex life with Ralph consists mostly of his masochistic fetishes. Dr. Melfi suggests that Tony is reluctant to cuckold Ralph, and in fact, Tony continues to push Valentina away until she informs him she broke up with Ralph, and he gets confirmation from Janice by agreeing to pay her $3,000 for the information that Ralph really does have unusual sexual tendencies. Now, I'll say this: the 3,000 aside, Tony knows exactly who to go to with this. All
Okay.
right, now tell me what he's really into. $3,000. Here you go. All right. I feel like Janice had like a PowerPoint presentation. There were like pictures. She had to explain it all.
See, the thing that gets me is we see Ralphie bad mouthing her about the stuff that he had done with her. So like he's talking to Vito and a couple of the other guys, like, oh, can you believe she wanted to do this? That is what he requested.
Yep.
So it's like he requests these things, he gets them, and then in order to potentially prevent everybody from finding out about it and believing it, he's going to bring it up in jest to make it look like, Janice is the bad guy. And having seen the series, the people that he's talking to, it's just we're gonna get, deeper into this ball of wax, man. But I'm just like, bro, it's crazy how, you know, close to the vest these guys play anything outside of the norm. It's just like, we know Richie liked to hold a gun, Ralphie and all these guys have the E at the end. Whatever, that's a whole nother thing. Ralphie, likes what he likes. Junior is being ridiculed because of, conolingus, man. I mean, it's just
Right.
like it's crazy. It's crazy.
As part of a long term plan formed a few episodes earlier, Tony starts giving directions to his underlings through payphone calls to Christopher and informs his lawyer that he is making steps to isolate himself from incriminating discussions. Carmela, who seems to be infatuated with Furio, empathizes with him when he leaves for Naples, Italy to attend his father's funeral. While in Italy, Furio discusses his homesickness with his uncle, but mentions that what is pulling him back to America is a woman. When Furio confides that the woman is the Don's wife, he is warned not to pursue the relationship any further, since it would be considered an act of treason and disrespect, would likely be discovered and would get him killed. The uncle goes on to tell him that the only way that he could have Carmela is if he killed Tony. Furio says that he understands. I'll be honest, I didn't think he was going to come back after that.
See, I felt like he was gonna come back after the funeral. I just didn't know what it was gonna be like. Like some of the scenes that we got after he comes back were a surprise to me. Because even when he came back, he still tried to keep his distance
Mm-hmm.
from Carmela, and then he's giving her gifts that he has for everybody in the family except for her.
Yep.
And then when she points that out, he's like, "Well, I did bring you something, and it's what was it, aged vinegar
Yeah.
or something like that." Like, I mean, it's like they're in high, in grade school. They like each other, they do little things here and there, but it can't last, cannot last. So
Mm-hmm.
because, and it's because Carmela is not meant to have anybody other than Tony because every possible love interest, and I say love interest with air quotes around that, every possible love interest she's had, there's been an issue. Father in Tentola, the brother, Craftsman, of, the one guy who they bottomed out in the sporting goods store, his
Right.
brother-in-law.
His
Uh,
brother-in-law. Yeah.
yeah, and then now Furio, it's just she's just not meant to get any play.
Right. At home, Tony plays a joke on a showering Carmela by emptying a glass of cold water over her. She does not seem impressed, and when she discovers a broken false fingernail in Tony's clothes, it infuriates her. She vents her anger by stealing Tony's keys to the duck feed bin while Tony was showering, taking 2 bound stacks of money he had hidden there, and investing it with several stockbrokers in $9,900 segments in order to avoid the $10,000 mandatory notification to the FBI. To the IRS. After recounting the hidden money, Tony discovers that there is some missing. Before having a chance to talk about it with Carmela, he discovers the false nail, which Carmela left on his nightstand next to his car keys.
Purpose.
Tony walks downstairs where Carmela is reading the newspaper. He asks for coffee, which she makes, and noticing his demeanor, asks Tony if he wishes to discuss anything. He says no. AJ comes downstairs and Tony asks if he had been in the backyard. After AJ denies being in the backyard and leaves, Carmela again asks Tony if he wishes to talk about anything. He declines and asks Carmela the same. She responds likewise. So the phrase mergers and acquisitions refers to the aspect of corporate finance strategy and management dealing with the merging and acquiring of different companies as well as other assets. In this episode, it could also allude to Carmela's acquisition of Tony's cash, putting it into long-term investments.
Yeah.
Tony's acquisition of cousin Brian as a financial advisor and involvement of Brian in secrets from Carmela and from Brian's wife, Janelle. Tony's acquisition of Ralphie's horse, Tony's acquisition of Valentina,
Mhm.
and in his meeting with Dr. Melfi, Tony talks about how often in the olden days, mafia men would take their mistresses out on Friday night and their wives out on Saturday. This could be a reference to Goodfellas, in which Lorraine Bracco plays gangster Henry Hill's wife. Tony also almost matches Ray Liotta's dialogue from the film when, as Henry, he is explaining the same custom. Friday nights were for the wives, but Saturday was always for the girlfriend. This is particularly relevant as the Sopranos creator David Chase refers to Goodfellas as his Quran. All right, so then we go into one of my favorite episodes so far. Whoever did this.
Whoever did this.
Is the 9th episode of season 4, the 48th overall episode of the series, written again by Robin Green and Mitchell Burgess and directed by Tim Van Patten, originally aired on November the 10th, 2002. Ralph makes a prank call to Nucci Galtieri, saying that Paulie has been arrested for a situation involving pederasty. The shock of such a call causes Nucci to go into a state of mild shock. As Junior Soprano is leaving court, he is surrounded by media and accidentally hit in the head by a boom mic, making him fall down several steps. He is sent to the hospital with a concussion. Initially, Junior seems to be acting confused, and a physician offers a theory that Junior may have had developing dementia and it could have been exacerbated by the concussion. But later, Junior is found to be fine and enjoying his stay at the hospital as respite from the trial. Tony thinks the head blow could be a golden opportunity for Junior. Tony suggests to his attorney, Harold Melvoin, that they could use this in Junior's defense via an unstable mental capacity claim, and Junior is to act as if he has Alzheimer's. Tony tells him all he has to do is act ubats or crazy, and this will end his legal problems.
Mm-hmm.
The state appoints a psychiatrist to evaluate Uncle Junior's mental status in his home. She interviews him at his kitchen table. He pretends to not recall much of anything while Tony's sister Janice gives a thumbs up on Junior's performance to Bobby Bacala. One morning sometime later, however, FBI agents posted outside Junior's house witness him being brought back to his house by his in-home nurse after idly wandering to the neighbor's house for ice cream. Junior seems to stand in his living room genuinely confused. Thoughts?
So seeing Junior take that fall was fun, especially considering how he's just so caught up in how people see him based on his trial. Like the whole thing with the illustrator, the way they were drawing him, he's like, I gotta be cool. But so to see him take that fall is one thing. I mean, it's like the way they coached him up, like, bro, you can't say you don't know your name, because they'll know you're bad. You're either they'll know you're faking it or they'll think you're crazy enough to lock you up for real. Like, it's
Right.
so it's a lot going on, but the funniest part is exactly what you laid out. I mean, we've got Paulie and Ralphie going back and forth, and now we're getting, Ralphie acting out by calling his mom and getting her all riled up, and we don't get to see Paulie's initial reaction to this,
Right.
which I would have loved to see when he figured out, because it's obvious he knew who it was, but I would have loved to have seen him figure out, and then who was there to kind of calm him down, because first response from Paulie would have been like, I gotta kill him, right? Like, I gotta kill him. So the fact that he did not react the way that I thought and expected him to initially, I'm impressed a little bit by Paulie, but that's it's short lived, short lived impressed.
Because he was saying, like, look, the interior designer said something to me and I took him out.
Right.
Still don't get that. Like, the guy had the money. And
Yeah.
he's like, I'm just sitting here watching TV and it's just a stray remark versus, I mean, he made a prank call to your mother and
Right.
especially Ralph. Ralph just got out of the Jenny Sachs stuff.
Yep. Just got
There
out
are
of it.
certain there are certain people like they never learn. Like he will never learn. Ralphie's not around too much longer. Spoiler, folks, but well, I mean, I got to get into it. Ralph could live fully sense wise until he was 100. He was never going to change.
No.
Oh no, although I say that something's about to happen where I feel like he does change a little bit. So I'm gonna do a 180.
See, you say that, but we see how he responds after that happens. Like the major thing that he does after what's about to happen to someone close to him. You
Right,
know, that was the opportunity to change fully
right.
because of his reactions after that. It's why we see he's not around that much longer because he really didn't learn. It's in him to be an F up. It is just
It's in him. That's the thing. That's the thing. I was going to first say he's never going to change. He has that capacity, and I feel like starts to go down that. But sometimes like you travel down that road so long, it's almost like you're on rails. You can't turn that thing around overnight. I mean, this is the Titanic, and he hits the iceberg, and there's still time to save himself, but it's in his nature. It's in his nature.
hits
Although
the iceberg
I will
and
say
goes
this, like,
full speed.
what? Yeah, I will say this. In a little while, we're about to go through it. Actually, I did feel bad for him. I'm
I
not
did.
excusing anything that happens before this or after this, but there's a moment where I
He's
feel
right.
bad for him. And yeah, I feel bad for him, and my appreciation for another character goes up tremendously. We'll get into it right now. When Ralph Cifaretto's 12-year-old son Justin and a friend are playing an unsupervised game of The Lord of the Rings with a bow and arrow, Justin's inadvertently shot in the chest by an arrow. The maid bangs loudly on Ralph's bathroom door while he is taking a bath, urging him to come to Justin's aid. Ralph rushes outside to see his son laying on the ground, bleeding and unconscious. Justin is quickly rushed to the hospital where he remains in a coma. In the hospital waiting room, Ralph lashes out at his ex-wife and her husband as she had just accused him of negligent behavior, not listening to Justin's request to go to the gun club, which also had a certified archery range, and at the boy who injured his son. During the altercation, Ralph has to be physically restrained by Tony, who shouts for Ralph to calm down as they were only kids, and Tony and Ralph performed similar stunts when they were the kids' age.
Right.
In the following days, Ralph is guilt and grief stricken and claims he regrets his actions he has done throughout his life. He even goes and visits Father Phil in Tinola to try to redeem himself, creates a $20,000 a year scholarship at Rutgers University in Jackie Jr.'s name, apologizes to Rosalie April for not being more sympathetic when her son died, and proposes to her. Rosalie declines marriage but accepts Ralph's apology. Rosalie April.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way that that man treated her,
Big time.
left her, had her like drugged half of the time and out of it, cheated on her behind her back, had her son killed,
Yep.
and she walked into that hospital room. I'm like, you know what, Rosalie? Several notches she went up in that.
I can absolutely co-sign what you're saying right there. It would have been easy for her to just be ugly, because of all the stuff that this man did for her. But what she's understanding is the loss of a child, and his son wasn't even gone. It's
Right.
just understanding the particulars about how long he was gone, how long he had gone without air. Like, you're sitting there thinking he's never going to be the same.
Right.
So as a parent, you're sitting there looking at your kid, wishing that you could do everything in the world to change their situation, and you can't. That's where she was when Jackie Jr. was on the lam. I'm pretty sure she would have much rather. She would have given anything to cleared his book so that he wouldn't, be in risk of dying. But there's nothing that she could do. And then once she got the news, I mean, she recognized, look, that's it. There's
Yeah.
nothing that I can do to bring him back. And she saw that pain in another person, regardless of what he did to me. This pain that goes beyond our personal relationship. He is a human being that is suffering. So, got to show love to Rosalie on that one because, I mean, if you look at it, since this show has started, have we seen anybody else lose more? You
And
know,
Rosalie. Yeah. No.
Rosalie, I mean, honestly, bro, I mean, it's like, yeah, Tony's had some deaths, but the deaths that have been around Tony, he's been involved with. Rosalie had no choice on her husband or her son. She has just essentially been a victim to just sit there and take this on. And she's done it fairly well. I mean, if you look at her, she's still social. She's been able to travel a little bit. She's still, I mean, and it doesn't seem like she's like bumping Sarah having to work at the local grocery store handing out samples. I mean, she seems to be taken care of, but it's just the amount of loss that she's had, and for her to continue trucking, it takes some. I commend her for that.
So far, the only people that I really like, and I don't have much against, are Rosalie, Bobby Bacala, and Father Phil. Although Father Phil was a little sketchy there in the first season, but now he just shows up. It's like weddings and funerals,
Big
and the
time.
occasional mass if they show it.
Look, I got you say Bobby B. I got no ill will with Bobby B. I even said if I had to compare myself to a character, it would be Bobby B. But Father Antantola, man, I don't know, man. I mean, he came in like real rough shot. Like he really was. What Carmela said about him calling him a manipulator and preying on women, I 100% see as accurate. He was definitely doing that. And, It's he chose that life. I want to say it sucks because he's putting himself in a situation where he can't eh, see what it would be like to be with these particular people, but he chose the life. He could always say, "Nah, I don't want to wear this outfit anymore. I want to go, teach gym, and then I can date whoever I want." True, but as long as you wearing that makeshift collar, bro, you got to lock that thing down.
And he does. But he also, to your point, he also does a lot of what Carmela says. Like, it's being kind of manipulative towards these women. They come and they baking stuff, or they have stuff in the freezer and stuff like that, or you want a glass of wine and stuff. And Father Phil is there for it. Well, as long as you're pouring it,
Well, he always done. Look, she offered him coffee. He was like, "Well, if it's not too much trouble, but it is getting close to that A hour now." So, like, so wait, hold up. Yeah, so clearly drinking is not a sin as far as Father Antola is concerned. He's always down.
They use real wine, bro,
Oh
in
no, they
the
no,
communion.
100%, 100%. But the whole concept of a communion is taking of the body and the blood of Christ. When he was
Right.
drinking with Carmela, there was no
Oh
blood
no.
or body getting consumed. He was trying to get a little sauced, and we see
Oh,
him sauced. We see
yeah. Oh yeah.
him
Although a little bit later in the night, he's like, "I'll take your confession," and he does.
sauced.
And then in the morning, AJ just comes back, just oblivious to everything.
Yeah.
Tony consoles Ralph when he breaks down in tears at the being after bringing Tony his share of recent earnings. Using the opportunity, Tony confesses to Ralph that he's seeing Valentina. Although surprised, Ralph does not seem to protest the new relationship, but passes on Tony's suggestion for him to spend therapeutic time at the stables with Pio Mai. Paulie, however, still holds a grudge towards Ralph, especially since he knows Ralph prank called his mother earlier to get even with Paulie for telling Johnny Sack that Ralph made the Jenny Sack joke.
Hmm.
A fire occurs at the stable where Pio Mai is kept. The horse was not emulated by the fire, but the trainer reveals that it was so badly hurt by the fire, the only humane course of the action was to put it to sleep. Tony believes Ralph set the fire intentionally to collect on the $200,000 insurance policy he and Ralph had on the horse. After going to the stables the morning the trainer calls and delivering the bad news and seeing Pile Mai's corpse wrapped up and dragged away by a tractor, Tony goes to Ralph's house. Tony delivers the news to Ralph that Pile Mai is dead. Ralph expresses his condolences to Tony, does not seem to be particularly moved by the horse's death. He and Tony go into the kitchen where Ralph is preparing eggs on the stove. Ralph seems to be more focused on informing Tony of Justin's improving condition, but Tony keeps bringing the conversation back to the dead horse. Tony will beat a dead horse.
Oh, Tony will definitely be definitely.
When Tony theorizes Ralph could have set the fire intentionally to collect the insurance, Ralph angrily assures Tony he had nothing to do with it. Tony asks him if he's heard from Corky lately, an expert arsonist who was responsible for setting Artie Bucco's restaurant on fire.
Use the same technique.
Ralph gets enraged, saying that Tony doesn't care about him having to beat up innocent people just as long as he gets his money, and then makes a snide remark about him caring so much about a horse while he eats meat at his desk. In a furious rage, Tony punches Ralph, knocking him across the kitchen. The two scuffle briefly, with Ralph unsuccessfully defending himself with pots, pans, a knife, and Raid spray. The fight culminates with Tony shouting at Ralph as he strangles him and bashes his head against the kitchen floor until he finally dies. Tony enlists Christopher at an untimely moment as Christopher has just shot up heroin and is nodding out on the sofa to help dispose of the body, explaining that Ralph was already dead when he arrived. Even in a heroin-induced daze, Christopher does not seem to buy Tony's version, but also does not mind what has happened much. I have to say this. Now, there's a wrestling podcast that I listen to that is also obsessed with The Sopranos. There's the one that have spoiled a couple of things. They love this scene. They love it because if you go back, Tony asks Christopher about something when he comes in. Christopher's response, like, "Did you do it?" He's, "I didn't," and that's the way he says it. "I didn't." I'm like, dude, you put like 5 extra syllables in that word because he's
Right.
so high. Because he's so high.
Yeah, you're 100% right, man. Look, that fight scene was pretty real. It was, to me, any as of all the altercations that we've seen Tony in, any work that we've had to see Tony get involved in, he hasn't had to get overly physical. You know, in the very first episode, we see him run a little bit, you know, after old buddy for the, no, excuse me, scratch that. He sends Christopher to run after him. He drives the car to get that guy in the first episode here. So, yeah, we haven't seen Tony getting physical. We've seen him do work, but I mean, as far as like outside of old buddy in Maine,
Yeah,
whenever on college, outside of that one, I can't say that we have had anybody fight back that
right.
much. You know, Ralphie legitimately tried to put up a fight, spraying him with Raid, hitting him with pots and pans. He's just, at the end of the day, he's a smaller guy. Unfortunately, you a welterweight trying to take out a heavyweight, man, it's not going to happen.
And it is noted in the notes for this episode. Once again, Tony goes off when Ralph mentions something about his weight and meat. You
Mm.
know, he's like, you um feel sad and remorse for this horse dying, yet you'll eat meat at your desk. And Tony goes off. Christopher cuts off Ralph's head along with his hands, placing them in a bowling bag, discovering in the process that Ralph is bald. Now, when that wig comes off, he loses it. He's like, "Holy shit!" And wears a wig. When night falls, Christopher and Tony dispose of Ralph's body by throwing it over a cliff into a quarry. They take his head and hands to Mikey Palmisa's hospitalized father's farm. Because the ground is frozen, Tony uses a backhoe to dig up a hole while he scolds Christopher for his drug use. Christopher tells Tony that Ralphie getting whacked could be a problem, to which Tony replies, "You're the only other one who knows about it." The men shower at Bada Bing to get rid of their clothes, which are to be burned. You think about it. In the previous episode, Johnny Sack tells Ralph, "I'm the one that stops you from getting your head cut off by Tony."
Right.
And then a couple episodes later, he's getting his head cut off on
Just think,
Tony's orders, not by Tony, but on Tony's orders.
you're right.
Tony awakens at the strip club the next morning, calling Christopher's name, but realizes he has already left. Tony then sees a picture of Tracy on the mirror, the Bada Bing stripper who was killed by Ralph.
Hmm.
Tony then throws open the back door of the club and walks from the darkness into the blinding daylight of the next day. When Tony looks in the mirror the morning after killing Ralph, he sees the picture of Tracy, the stripper who Ralph killed in the episode University, as we said before. And in University, Tony and Sylvia remark that Tracy the stripper is a good looking thoroughbred. Pio Mai is also a good looking thoroughbred. It is proven that Ralph's murdered Tracy, but only suspect as to whether or not he was responsible for Pio Mai's death. In University, Ralph was particularly obsessed with gladiator films. Ralph himself dies in a violent duel to the death. In the wait, Johnny Sack tells Ralph, "I should have let Tony chop off your head a year ago." So now we're 6 episodes later. It happens. David Chase confirmed in 2021 that Ralph did, in fact, set the fire that killed the horse. He also confirmed what was already implied in the episode's subtext. Tony's murder of Ralph is not so much about the horse as it is about Ralph killing Tracy. Like he wanted to kill him back after Tracy was killed.
See, my issue with that whole thing, my guy, is the fact that he didn't kill Ralph whenever Tracy died. I mean, it's like he had ample reason to put Ralph aside. If not for what he did to Tracy, which was absolutely horrible, then because it's going to cause the stain between New Jersey and New York. He had all the reason to do it, but he waits until he insults him personally, by killing the horse and then by reacting to it the way that he did. It was, I mean, when I saw that part, I felt bad for Tracy because I'm like, you deserve more than that. This man is fine. The man who killed you is finally dead, and he deserves to be, but he got off for the wrong reasons. That's ultimately what I was feeling.
So rest in peace to Ralph Cifaretto.
Peace out, Ralph. Uh,
Although he keeps coming back,
yeah,
Tony will keep seeing him
he
amongst other people.
which makes it because Tony was look. Kill the man for the reasons that he deserves to die. Like the man killed that girl with his bare hands. He deserved to die for that reason. You let all this time pass. His son is now in the hospital, essentially a vegetable, and now
Right.
you choose to kill him.
But it's just another thing like we heard Christopher talk about. Like that stuff still haunts you.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
So
What?
and you would think that you wouldn't think that somebody like Tony would do it, but we know Tony's got a lot going on up in his head, and we
Oh,
know the reasons why.
absolutely.
So then we go to The Strong Silent Type, the 10th episode of season 4, the 49th overall episode. Teleplay was written by Terrence Winter, Robin Green, and Mitchell Burgess from a story by David Chase. Directed by Alan Taylor, originally aired on November the 17th, 2002. So, a little pre-Thanksgiving episode here. We're getting into the Thanksgiving season.
Loving family.
At the Bada Bing, now a week after Tony killed Ralph, the crew is hanging about playing pool. Christopher walks in with a large parcel in one hand as the rest of them are discussing Ralph's disappearance. Tony decides to call Ralph in front of his crew, feigning ignorance about Ralph's fate. The parcel Christopher brought in turns out to be the painting of Tony and Pyomai that Tony had ordered previously. Distraught, Tony leaves the Bing. Almost in tears as he drives down the highway, he calls back to the strip club and orders Silvio to destroy the painting. Later, Paulie sees Benny and Little Paulie trying to burn the painting and rescues it from destruction, saying it would be an honor to have a painting of Tony hanging in his house. Paulie hangs it in his living room, but later takes it down to have it modified to garb Tony in the uniform of a Napoleon-like 18th century general. Now, this is a creepy painting.
Yeah.
When he finally gets it back, that painting is creepy. Ralph's disappearance is starting to become an issue. At a dinner with Silvio and Patsy, Allie Boy Barisi, speaking off the record, verbalized what some are thinking. Tony killed Ralph because of a horse. After Silvio leaves the table, Allie Boy states that any boss who kills a member of his crew over a horse should be eliminated, and that if it were the case that Tony committed such an act, Silvio would be the first in line to pull his plug. Now, do you believe that?
Uh, who's Alley Boy? I mean, honestly, bro. I mean, it's just like this is just a person talking out of pocket. Do I think that I don't know that Sil could do that. I
I
don't know.
don't either. I don't either.
Not without someone extremely high on the chain, like a Carmine, giving him the green light directly. Like no side pocket talking, no tongue in cheek stuff. You're gonna be direct as possible. Not like you was with Tony and Johnny Sack. No. If you're going to tell Seal to eliminate Tony, you have to be direct with it. I can't see Seal coming to that conclusion on his own.
I don't either, but especially because when Tony took Christopher out and tell him, like, look, I'm going to be running things through you, he mentioned Seal. He's like, Seal is still going to be up there, and, you know, we got to take care of Seal. He didn't mention Paulie.
Nope.
He didn't mention Passy, but he mentioned Seal. And I told you when I was thinking, I'm like, if something had happened to Tony, who in the crew would he depend on to make sure that Carmela and the kids were taken care of? And I think it would be Seal.
Seal and Christopher, honestly, but I mean Christopher because there's relation there.
Right.
Based on the actual family line of it, Christopher is Carmela's cousin.
Right.
So that's how he has the relation to Tony. Also adding to the fact that Tennessee Moltisanti was he was his hero when he was coming up, and we'll get more into that whenever we discuss all the Saints of Newark. But you know, if there were going to be anybody to take care of Carmela, Seal and Christopher would be it. Paulie, you know, Patsy, Parisi. Also take into consideration, he did not name anyone that he has thought about taking out. You know, he killed Patsy's brother and thought that there might be might be a need to take out Patsy as well. And then Paulie's just been a little flaky, a little weird lately, so you don't know what to believe. So yeah, he's naming the people that I don't think up until this point has thought about killing.
Right. Meanwhile, Tony visits Ralph's comatose son in the hospital and later has a session with Dr. Melfi. As Tony relates his pain over losing Pylamide, Melfi comments that he seems to grieve more for animals than for humans. Further, she reminds him that his sadness about the ducks leaving his swimming pool was an inner metaphor for his worries and fears about losing his family. Dr. Melfi questions whether the death of the horse can be attached to another internal conflict. When Furio returns from Naples, he has gifts for AJ and Meadow, but nothing for Carmela. Later, Carmela visits Furio at his house under the pretext of giving interior decorating tips, with AJ once again acting as an unwitting chaperone who does not want to be there.
He does not want to be there at all.
And receives an improvised present of a jar of homemade balsamic vinegar from Furio that he brought back from Italy. When Carmela tells Rosalie about her feelings, the widow advises that if Carmela hasn't had sex with Furio yet, she shouldn't, and only to keep Tony from exacting revenge on Furio.
Mm-hmm.
At a meeting, Johnny Sack demands that Tony let New York in on the HUD scam. When Tony refuses, Johnny threatens him with, "You sure you want to go down this road, Tony?" And we are far down that road. That road continues on.
Oh yeah.
Again at the Bada Bing, Tony calls a meeting of Paulie, Silvio, Vito, Carlo, and other key family members. Once everyone is seated and listening, Tony states that he thinks he knows what happened to Ralph and that if he's right, he won't be coming back. Tony asserts Johnny Sack had Ralph killed over the HUD scam. Tony mentions payback will be exacted later on. Others speculate and question the Jenny Sack joke and whether or not it had any bearing on Ralph's disappearance. Tony asserts that he's sure it didn't help matters. Adriana meets her FBI handler, Agent Robin Sanseverino,
okay,
and feeds her as little information as possible. Sanseverino, knowing about Christopher's heroin habit, suggests that Adriana pushed for him to go into rehab and says the FBI has been sending them Hazelden Foundation pamphlets through the mail. when your FBI handler thinks that your fiance has a drug problem, send him a pamphlet.
You signed me up for that?
Adriana breaks down in tears when she finds that Christopher, in a heroin-induced stupor, sat on her dog Cosette, killing it. Christopher, late for a meeting with Paulie and Silvio, is carjacked and robbed while attempting to purchase heroin in a low-income barrio. When he returns home beaten, Adriana gives him a pamphlet for a rehab clinic but he hits her several times and knocks her to the floor. All right, so I'm not seeing it here, but I'm pretty sure it was this episode, or maybe at the beginning of the next one. But I'm going to talk about it here.
Okay.
Paulie and Silvio talking
Mm-hmm.
about Tony and all of his different things, and Paulie makes a very interesting comment. And he's like, "I've been here longer than you. I go back to Johnny,"
Yep.
knowing that he's talking about Johnny Boy Soprano. But you could also read it that he goes back to Johnny Sack. That's the way I took it. Like, I'm like, oh man, they could have put bright lights on this episode and flashed them.
Right.
Because that's the first thing I'm talking about. I'm like, yep, you sure do go back to Johnny all the time.
Danny. I think that episode maybe, well, not that episode, but that scene you're talking about is at the beginning of the next one, because that disappointment that we saw for Paulie comes at the end of that episode. So it's kind of like a mini arc,
I
in that
got you.
episode. He's so excited, that he's talking real big and bad, like, you might want to watch yourself, Seal. And then obviously for the episode to end the way that it did. So yeah, that was on the next one, but we still did get to see some real family interaction in this one with the after, in response to uh Adriana's black eye and the drug use, we have our first ever Soprano family intervention. Oh, this is the worst.
Let's get into it, because there's a progression that happens here. Carmela receives a visit from a bruised Adriana and hears about how Christopher's addiction has left him increasingly unstable. Tony rejects the advice of Junior for dealing with Christopher, who compares Christopher to a beloved dog who gets rabies and must be put out of his misery.
Seriously.
Instead, one morning, family and friends organize an intervention. The opening exercise involves everyone telling Christopher how his drug use has affected their lives. This poor guy. I
Seriously.
think I mentioned it when I watched the thing. He gets, I mean, he's expecting, he's like, all right, this is not going to go, there may be some tense moments. This is what you're going to do. Paulie is like, Paulie calls him, what did he call him, a snitch or something like that? Or
Oh, he was a rat bastard for something, because this guy that's leading the intervention, yeah, he's got a pass with these guys. Oh, he's not going to let him forget it at all.
Tony becomes enraged when Adriana reveals that Christopher has accidentally killed Cosette. Christopher frequently interrupts and verbally attacks those speaking to him, and he's got all the receipts. He
Bro,
brings out his book of receipts.
I'm sitting there watching that scene, and I'm seeing all these people sitting on their high horse, passing judgment on Christopher. Adriana herself has dabbled in heroin, so it's not outside of the realm of possibility to think that maybe she could have gotten high enough to sit on her dog. Who knows? But you got Seal, disgusting. Like, it was hilarious to see. One night I come into the Bing, you're sitting in your own filth, disgusting, and I'm just like, how does that supposed to be constructive or help him at all? But Tony's upset with him because he killed Cosette. Tony just had Christopher help him dispose of a body and help him lie about it. How is Tony in any position to point at Christopher? And that's the thing that got me when Christopher was ready to pull these receipts out and pull everybody's card, like, Seal, Mom, like, all y'all trying to jump on me right now, but all y'all got skeletons too. Let's talk about it. And then he gets his ass whooped badly.
He makes veiled references to the Pine Barrens.
Yep.
He mentions Silvio's infidelity. The counselor tries to stop the accusations flying in the room, but that dude should have just got up and walked out of the room. He was over. It was over.
It was a wrap. It was a wrap.
But when Christopher starts to disrespect Tony and insults his own mother, that's it. He gets a beating from the men in the room. Before really getting started, the intervention ends with Christopher being taken to the emergency room with a hairline skull fracture. At the hospital, Tony tells Christopher that the only reason Christopher is alive is because you're my nephew and I love you.
Right.
He arranged for Christopher to go to a rehab clinic in Pennsylvania and demands that he not leave until he is clean and sober, telling him that Patsy will be staying at a Howard Johnson's nearby. Tony says that Patsy's assignment is to be on hand in case of emergencies. While that may be indeed so, Tony strongly implies that Patsy is also there to kill Christopher should he attempt to leave the clinic without graduating, nephew or no nephew.
Yep.
Christopher arrives at the clinic with Adriana and Patsy. His chocolates are confiscated because they contain caffeine, and he says goodbye to his fiancee before entering the facility. Tony later pays a visit to Uncle Junior but finds him napping. Svetlana is there without her prosthetic leg and using crutches. They exchange small talk on the couch. Svetlana discusses the difference between Americans and other worlds' outlooks. Americans don't expect anything bad to happen and are surprised when it does, while the rest of the world expects the worst and are not disappointed. Tony remarks that Svetlana, in partial shadow with her blonde hair and cigarette smoke wafting about her, reminds him of Greta Garbo. They look at each other intently, kiss, and then have sex on Uncle Junior's couch. Afterwards, while Tony dresses, he suggests seeing her again. Svetlana says it's not a good idea, and Tony seems upset. When Junior's home help nurse Bronco arrives unexpectedly and finds them sitting together, Tony leaves. The episode closes with juxtaposing scenes of both Tony and Furio preparing food and eating alone in their respective homes without Carmela. Tony microwaves rigatoni and pours a glass of milk from a plastic bottle, while Furio boils pasta and then fries it, grates cheese, and has a glass of wine. The music of military drums starts playing in the background. Paulie, also home alone, hangs the painting of Tony and Pyle and I over his fireplace. Tony has now been redone to look as an 18th century Napoleon-like general, as Paulie wanted. Paulie sits with his back to the painting and turns the television to a Yankees game. However, the eyes of Tony in the painting still seem to bother him. There's an unintended and unfortunate reference during the intervention scene when Christopher taunts Tony about his eating habits and predict you'll have a heart attack by the time you're 50. James Gandolfini would in fact die of a heart attack on June 19, 2013 at the age of 51.
Damn. See, stuff like that, man, is freaky, bro. I mean, like it
Yep.
really is freaky because while James Gandolfini and Tony Soprano are not the same person, you would be blind to say you're watching Sopranos from beginning to end and not noticing Tony Soprano getting significantly bigger
Mm-hmm.
throughout the show. So that statement rang true, and I mean, and it sucks. Not, I mean, any life loss is tragic. Whether they're talented or not. But James Gandolfini was a talent.
Absolutely.
And it stinks, but more than anything, we got a glimpse of his son, and once again, I'm referencing All the Saints of Newark. So I feel for the family, that were left behind. But it's creepily eerie how that line lands and how he passed the way he did. That was tough.
Yep. And so we've reached Calling All Cars,
Oh no, cars.
the 11th episode of season 4, the 50th overall episode of the series, written by David Chase, Robin Green, Mitchell Burgess, and David Flabbot, from a story by Chase, Green, Burgess, and Terrence Winter. It was directed by Tim Van Patten and originally aired on November the 24th, 2002. Tony Soprano has a dream in which he rides in the back of his father's old Cadillac. Carmela drives while Ralphie sits in front of him, and a caterpillar appears on his bald head that suddenly changes into a dark butterfly. Sitting next to Tony is Gloria Trillo at first, but changes to Svetlana. Tony discusses the dream in therapy, and Dr. Melfick suggests that it means that Carmela is in control and Tony wants to square the changes in the lives of the others in the car with her. Dr. Melfi also asks in reference to Ralph, "Has your friend changed recently?" Tony frustratingly stresses that they were only business associates and replies, no. Tony expresses a dissatisfaction with his therapy and that his lack of impulse control still leads him to make mistakes in his life and work. He makes a sarcastic reference to the fact that the money he spent on therapy could have gone towards a Ferrari and at least he would have gotten a blowjob out of that. Bobby Bacala drops his daughter Sophia off at a baseball game and she notices a birthday-like cake in the back of the car. Bobby later takes the cake to his wife Kieran's grave and buries it next to her. While burying the cake, he has a conversation with his dead wife, confiding in her that he would have been with her already if it wasn't for the kids. Later at dinner, an upset Bobby is followed upstairs by Janice, who questions him about the cake. He initially lies, but then tells her why he did what he did, because it would have been their 14-year anniversary. In Bobby Jr.'s room, the children talk about ghosts. Sophia is afraid, but Bobby Jr. tries to reassure her that there are no such thing as ghosts. Janice visits Carmela at the Soprano household to discuss her difficulties in getting Bobby to move on. Tony has a sit down in New York City with Carmine and Johnny Sack. They demand 40% of his HUD business as it is linked to Assemblyman Zellman, who was in the pocket of both families, and any profit made by using Zellman should be split, though not equally, but fairly. Carmine comments on the missing Ralph, but Tony asks him the same question, gets up, and leaves. Carmine and Johnny look at each other and concede that Tony's reaction was about what they expected. Tony phones Johnny on his way home with a counteroffer of 5.5%, which Carmine rejects. Instead, Carmine dispatches Joey Peeps to attack Tony's appraiser on the HUD scam. He takes Anthony, an associate, with him and catches up to Vic, the appraiser. This poor guy, he's like, he keeps telling him, I'm only the appraiser. I'm only the appraiser.
The appraiser. I am only the appraiser and still caught hell. Like, dude, you got to understand. And I mean, I guess, in this world, if one appraiser gets beat up, there's no one else to assign to the case, right? Because I'm like, dude, it's not like he's in their pocket. This is just the case that he picked up. I mean, I've never been an appraiser, but I can't imagine that, you maybe you have a section of the city,
I think
so
that's it. He's
I've
like, hey,
got the
man, can you do this appraisal for me today? I'll do one of yours. Vic, you know that's your section of the city. My hands are tied
don't,
here.
don't send me
Vic
over
is
there,
like,
Vic.
Vic is like, I'm out of vacation days. I ain't got no sick time because you know Vic wanted to call in sick.
Right. Ridiculous.
Later, Johnny meets with Paulie and suggests that a change in leadership might be needed. Paulie is quick to put himself forward, reminding Johnny of his good relationship with New York. Johnny assures him that Carmine will always keep him in mind, just buttering Paulie up. Hey, maybe I can get Paulie to do my dirty work for me. Tony visits Junior at his home to discuss getting to a juror in the Rico trial, but Junior seems distracted and looks disheveled. Bronca, the new Russian nurse, and Junior are not getting along very well. Later, Tony has a meeting with Silvio, Vito, and Paulie to discuss the assault and disappearance of the appraiser. Eugene arrives to pick up Vito, and Paulie also reluctantly leaves. Once he is alone with Silvio, Tony raises the possibility of reaching out to little Carmine in Florida through their old friend Beansy. Vic the appraiser gets beaten down again later, this time by Vito and Dogsy to convince him to work for the Soprano family. I'm just the appraiser.
The appraiser. Get back to work.
At the Sopranos Sunday dinner, the DeAngelises and Bacalaris are visiting. After dinner, AJ disappears in his room with his girlfriend, Devin, but Carmela insists that he play a game with Bobby Jr. and Sophia. AJ pulls out a Ouija board and this progresses into a mock and prank seance that terrifies the Bacalari children. Carmela and Tony scold AJ for being insensitive to the kids who have lost their mother. Now, I just moved from Maine, but when I first got to Maine, I was there. I'd been there 4 days. My then boss had been covering the building, and she was going to go through my first RA meeting with me. And she says, after this week, I'll turn it over to you. We're there about to start the meeting, and this girl comes down and says, "You've got to empty out the entire building." I mean, like, she's just in tears. And my boss is very motherly. She was pregnant at the time, and she said, "Sweetheart, sweetheart, what's going on? Calm down." She said some guys upstairs were playing with the Ouija board and had released some evil spirits, and they were going throughout the entire building, and everything needs to, all the building needs to be evacuated because of these spirits. And my boss was like, "Sweetheart, that's made like by Milton Bradley or Parker Brothers. It's on the games app. It'll be fine. Go to bed." But you get the right people and you do the right thing and you can freak some people out.
Big time facts. Big time facts. There are people who definitely take that 100% to heart. They believe that the Ouija board is a real thing. They put power in it. So you talk about really, you start the game and then you don't end it the right way because you're supposed to say like goodbye or something like that at
Yeah,
the
yeah.
end. Some people believe if you don't do it right, you're leaving that doorway open. And it seems like Sophia and Bobby Jr. are amongst those people.
And we will find out very soon. Janice does not take, she doesn't look a gift horse in the mouth.
Not at all.
Tony gets a call from Beansy to confirm the Miami trip. He later speaks to Silvio and tells him he suspects Paulie being the leak through which Johnny is getting information on their business, and Silvio believes it could be a possibility. Tony asks Silvio to keep the trip to Miami quiet from Paulie. I think it was around this time that they had that conversation that we talk about. But yeah, he goes back to Johnny.
I just mind your something, my friend. Paulie says something. Ultimately, it seems like to sum it up, things could be changing, and you might be on the outs. That's ultimately the way that I took it. And he ends
Yeah.
it with my friend. So I mean, it's just like he's leaving that little sit down with Seal. Tony wasn't there because he's in Florida. He's leaving that sit down with Seal feeling empowered by his conversations that he's had with Johnny, and because he's seeing a heightened conflict between Jersey and New York at this time. So he's like kind of taking a stand, but without actually taking a stand and declaring sides at all.
Right. Svetlana calls Tony to thank him for sending her the diamond horseshoe brooch, previously rejected by Valentina. Tony seems eager to continue the relationship, but Svetlana again turns him down and hangs up. In therapy, Tony tells Dr. Melfi that he has broken up with Svetlana on his initiative. He makes a Freudian slip, saying after a while he had to cut off the leg. He eventually admits that it was actually the other way around and she broke up with him. He blames his lack of progress in therapy and mentions Svetlana calling him high maintenance. Tony again tells Dr. Melfi that he wants to leave therapy, but she insists that now that his symptoms are under control, they can make real progress. But Tony decides that her time is up. Tony kisses Dr. Melfi on the cheek and thanks her before he leaves. Afterward, Dr. Melfi calls her therapist, Dr. Kupferberg, and leaves a message on his answering machine to let him guess who is no longer her patient, adding calling all cars to the important news. At Junior's trial, the judge throws out attorney Melvoin's motion for mistrial due to Junior's head injury and claimed dementia because government psychiatrists have ruled him out being incapable of standing trial. Bobby reassures the frustrated Junior that they will get to a juror. Bobby and Janice get into a fight at a movie theater over Bobby's continuing reluctance to let go of his late wife. Later, Janice uses an internet chat program to deceive and secretly direct Bobby's children to a Ouija board in their home. When Bobby arrives home, his children are in a terrified state and he calls Janice for help. She tells him that she had heard them with the Ouija board earlier in the day, but didn't want to get involved because of their argument.
Because of the argument.
Janice uses her manufactured situation with the children as a reason that Bobby needs to move on and again asks him to eat his wife's last frozen ziti. Bobby reluctantly agrees. Tony arrives in Miami Beach and meets up with Beansy. Later, they meet with little Carmine at a restaurant. Carmine agrees to travel home and talk to his father, and he seems eager to place the blame for the situation at Johnny's feet. Tony mentions that Carmine has tried to reach Maurice Tiffin, as well as having the appraiser jump. Tony threatens action against New York families should negotiations fail to yield results. Tony has another dream where he follows a bald Ralphie to an old house, which Ralph enters. Tony is dressed in trousers, suspenders, and a sleeveless undershirt like a workman. He knocks on the door. After a few moments of no one answering, he knocks again and announces that he's here for the masonry job. After a few more moments, a female figure with a shadowy face resembling Livia Soprano appears upstairs from around the corner.
What are you talking about?
She walks slowly downstairs in shadow, but stops halfway staring at him. He sees her and then opens the door to let himself in. The door creaks. Tony says he is there for the masonry job and that he does not speak English. She remains silent. Just as Tony enters the house, he wakes up short of breath, sweaty and startled. He's still in Miami Beach at the Fontainebleau Hotel. He goes out to the balcony to catch some air.
So that was an interesting end to it, seeing Livia like that, obviously knowing that she's no longer with us, but obviously that was a major scene, and they got somebody who fits her
Right.
silhouette because I honestly thought that's who it was. I did not know if that had anything to do with, because I'm sitting there thinking like, why is he? I don't speak much English. Why is he having this flashback? Unless this
Right.
is his mind subconsciously tell him he needs to keep an eye on Furio, because the only person that we have in Tony's circle who doesn't speak the best English is Furio. So I was just trying, I mean, that's just me grasping at straws, trying to understand it all. But this was another powerful episode because it lays groundwork for what's coming.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some major change coming, and all of that, comes from a beef with New York. It's like once the wound was opened, there really wasn't any closing it. So I'm excited to see what we got coming, man. I really am.
And it's the next episode, which when we get there, we'll discuss it on our next episode, where a lot of things happen between Paulie and Carmine. Paulie's big in the next episode as well.
Yeah.
A lot of things happen both in front of and behind the scenes on the next episode of The Sopranos. I don't know if you know about this episode.
I'm not. I mean, look, you gonna. I know you always let me know a little something about the episodes that I don't know, man. So I appreciate you for telling me the biz.
I'm going to give everybody, including you, a little, like a sneak peek, like a hint, like an Easter egg, okay?
All right.
Then the next episode, anybody who's involved in that series, they call it the week that Tony Soprano disappeared. That's all I'm going to say. A little teaser for next time.
All right.
Yep, in a very important time in the series, and in a very important time in the production code, and a very important scene in the episode, James Gandolfini disappeared, and no one knew where he was. So a little bit of a teaser to go
Okay.
out.
Well, now I'm excited to find out more about this. All right. Let's fast forward.
Yeah. But in the meantime and in the in between time, my friend, let everybody know what you got going on.
Well, good people, if you'd like to hear more of my stylings, you can do that by going wherever you get your podcasts at and listening to the Joey Harris Show, where I have guested several times and love doing it. The last episode that we did has a lot of noteworthy stuff, as I've seen my guys shared clips from it, and I can't help but to laugh to go back and listen to it. What is mustard if not yellow? Um, also,
What is mustard anyway?
what is mustard anyway? Thanking this man sitting across from me because I was able to record the last installment in the Tokyo Smoke Show. Had actually started to edit that this afternoon, and then I just backed away from it again. So I'm hoping to have that finished before the next episode of what we're watching, and that can be heard again. Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. It was a very, very, very powerful episode, and I appreciate Joey for doing that with me. What I tell you, if you're looking for me, just find him. And if you find him, then you got me. So if y'all got questions or anything like that, I can be reached through Joey because he's my better half. So hey, brother, as always, man, I appreciate you for having me on, man. Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Always, brother. New episodes of the Joey Harris Show every Sunday, wherever you get your podcasts. Couple Joe Wrestling Show every Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, like, subscribe, comment, and share. We're inching closer. We need to get over 100 subscribers. So ever closer to 100 we are getting. And anytime you want to give us money, D Joey Harris on Cash App, just slide a little in there. All about it. TJ, as always, thank you, my brother. We will catch you all next time.
Peace.